Welcome back to A Slice of News, where I cut you off a slice of news. At long last, the DNC has finally released its autopsy of the 2024 election, but to be frank, it doesn't feel like it was worth the wait. Considering just how long they took to actually put it out and how resistant they were to doing so at all, it really made people wonder what it could possibly say that they felt was so damaging and so bad for them that they just didn't want anyone to see it. But now that it's out, we can largely see it boiled down to we didn't push Kamala hard enough. We lost in 2024 because Joe Biden didn't give enough support to Kamala prior to him dropping out of the race, and that during her time as vice president under Biden, she wasn't really hyped up enough to the point that when it became her time to become the presidential candidate, there wasn't really a solid enough picture of why she should be the next president. I sort of agree with that assessment, but I also sort of don't. While I guess the White House could have better positioned her as a potential candidate before Biden dropped out, citing the White House's lack of support of her as one of the root causes of why she lost in 2024 doesn't ring true. A lot of why Kamala lost in 2024 is because a lot of people just didn't see her as the type of candidate that they wanted to vote for. One of Kamala's biggest impediments to winning the 2024 election was that she was Kamala Harris. Even back when she was just potential vice presidential pick Kamala Harris, a lot of those future 2024 presidential voters were not a fan of her. Even though it had been nearly a decade after she'd left the position, she could still not escape the stigma many people had against her for her time as Attorney General of California. So, despite all the good things she did since then, including all the things she did as a senator following her leaving that position, many still refused to forget that and held it against her the entire time she was vice president, and now in her role as a presidential candidate. Despite what the autopsy seemed to suggest, I don't think the real issue was that the White House didn't sell the American people on potential President Kamala Harris. It's that Kamala Harris didn't sell the American people on President Kamala Harris. While she definitely pushed the fact that she was not Donald Trump and voting for her was making sure that Donald Trump would be getting one last vote, there wasn't really a sense, and perhaps because she didn't have the time, of why people should vote for her on her own merit. Running on just "I'm not Trump" can only get her so far. Another one of the big contributors as to why they lost in 2024 that the autopsy does not go into is the fact that Joe Biden took way too long to drop out, leaving Kamala way too little time to market herself as a viable candidate outside of just Joe Biden's vice president, resulting in a lot of people feeling like she was forced upon them, which turned a lot of people off from voting for her that otherwise might have if they'd had more of a chance to get to know her as presidential candidate Kamala versus just Joe Biden's handpicked successor. So part of what that autopsy should have said is that the DNC messed up by not encouraging, I don't want to say force, but strongly encouraging Joe Biden to not stay in the race as long as he did, and allowing there to be more space between him deciding not to run for re-election and a new Democratic candidate being named, even if it did end up being Kamala anyway. One thing that Autopsy does get right, though they didn't say it in exactly those words, is that one of their biggest stumbling blocks was that they did not energize their voter base and did not reach them across platforms the way the Republicans did. As they say in their document, in some ways, the Republican campaign was more like the Barack Obama campaign than the Democrats. And in part, that is what led to their victory. The Democrats just were not reaching and invigorating their voters in the same way. And then when it came time to vote, they were just not engaged enough to put her over the top. Another thing that their autopsy seems to get right is the citation that the Democratic Party has in large part lost the support of the working class in America. Obama may have managed to galvanize their support during his time in the office, but since then, that has softened and slipped to the point that they do not feel that they have a good grip on them, and that as a result, many of them switched to the opposing party. For many, the Democratic Party has become the party of the intellectual elite, out of touch with the needs of the common folk and the kitchen table issues that they deal with on a day-to-day basis. So it's not hard to see how the Republicans seized upon that perception and capitalized on it, positioning themselves as the working man's party, and bringing in those people who felt that the Democratic Party was out of touch with them and their needs in to vote Republican. So it seems at least that the DNC identifies the fact that that is an issue, that they are not seen as aligned with the average working class voter, and therefore they struggle to gain their votes. The reality, though, is not that the Republican Party truly is the party of the average person, of the working man. They're just better at promising that they are, promising that they will pass things that help the average American, but don't really follow through. So you'd think the Democrats would focus more on pointing that out, that the Republicans are largely about promising but not delivering, and that they could be the party of promising and delivering. But that isn't what they've been doing. Democrats absolutely have the potential to win back the working class to their side. They simply have not taken the steps to do that. Though admittedly some of it is not their fault. Many of the legislations they could have passed that would have been something they could point to say, look, we are working for you, average American, working class American, and here's the evidence, were blocked by Republicans so that they do not have that thing that they could directly point to as evidence that they are on the side of the working class voter. That, coupled with a lot of anti-Democrat propaganda from the right, pointing to that lack of progress towards working for the average working class American as a reason to not vote Democrat and to actually vote Republican, the Democrats were in a lot of ways at a disadvantage that they struggled to overcome, and that is part of what cost them the presidency in 2024. But while there were admittedly factors outside of their control that led to their loss in 2024, a lot of the things that led to their loss were in their control, and this autopsy seems to blame everything except themselves as to what caused it. And while I think they missed the mark a lot of the time, at the very least, it sounds like they were acknowledging that there were a lot of faults that were made, mistakes that could have been corrected before they became a mistake, proving that despite claims to the contrary, the DNC does have at least some measure of ability to see their own flaws and where they went wrong on their own. I think the real question is now, if they've now documented many of their faults, many of their mistakes, many of the ways they went wrong in this past election, are they then going to learn from those mistakes, learn from the places that they see they have gaps, and start to fill them in, to not fall for the same mistakes again? Or are they going to throw their arms up and say, we couldn't have known this was going to happen, and largely keep doing what they already are doing without actually addressing them? From the start, a lot of people said that 2024 was the Democrats' election to lose, considering that they were going up against Donald Trump, a president that was very unpopular during his time and shouldn't be all that easy to beat again, but lose to him was exactly what they ended up doing. From what we've seen of this document, of this autopsy on the 2024 election loss by the Democrats, I feel it hits some of the points, but it misses a lot of other ones. And it seems to me that their biggest issue was that they stuck to the well-worn roads. They just did what they always do and thought it would work out, and it didn't. They needed to do something different. They had to go off-road, try something more radical, and listen to what their voters actually wanted versus telling them what they wanted and just giving them what they say is what's best for them. If they'd held a Democratic primary instead of just telling Democrat voters, this is your candidate, this is who you're voting for, they may have been more inclined to vote Democrat in the election. But because Joe Biden held out so long before dropping out of re-election, that was not even an option. But seemingly nowhere in their autopsy do they even mention that fact or acknowledge that that could have been a problem. So while there are a lot of good points in this released autopsy, for me, what is the most obvious is not what it says, But what it does not say, it really leaves me wondering how they're going to apply what they did learn in the next election. Or if they're just going to fall back on, well, just do what we always do, but harder this time. They absolutely have the potential to learn from their mistakes and be even better than they were in 2024 and really capitalize on being a better Democratic Party. Whether they actually do that is another thing entirely. Alright, guys, that'll be it for this episode of A Slice of News. I've been your host, Mr. Slice, and until next time when I cut you off, another Slice of News. And don't forget to rate and review the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you find it.